there. And I've titled this Bible study, The Daring Daniel. Usually you'll hear the sermon titles, Dare to be a Daniel, but I decided to turn it around and make it The Daring of Daniel. So I want to fill in the outline a little bit and just remind you of some things that we've studied. First of all, with Nebuchadnezzar, we've shared with you the first siege of Jerusalem was in 605 BC. And at that time, according to the scriptures, there were 3,023 Jews who were deported to Babylon in that time. And I'm going to keep moving. Among the captives taken in the first siege, according to the Bible, were the sons of nobility. And they are described in these words, Daniel 1 and verse 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel. Now I'll pause there. Everyone know what a eunuch is? Okay. I won't go any further then. If you don't, Google later, all right? All right. Master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, particularly of the king's seed and of the princes. The king's seed would have been not the sons. All the sons of the king were killed, but the others of the royal line that would have been there. So these would have been sons of noble birth, sons of royal bloodlines. And then they're described here in Daniel 1 and verse 4. And so, and I preached this a few weeks ago, so I'm not taking time to preach it. I just want to go back and remind us all. So the ones that Nebuchadnezzar was looking for were children in whom there was no blemish. That is, physically they were whole. Also, they were well favored, so there was a handsomeness to them. Skillful in all wisdom, being children of nobles, children of the royal bloodline, they would have had education and training in Jerusalem, and so they were already very much proven, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. It's an unusual expression, but we would really kind of define it. They had social skills about them. These would have been men that knew how to carry themselves, but also how to command, and to whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So the goal of Nebuchadnezzar was what? To make those Jewish young men into Babylonians. That was his goal, to assimilate them into the culture. And then we have this trial that is placed before them, and that is Nebuchadnezzar orders and commands that they are to have the best of the food from his table. And so for 3 years, they are eating the king's food. It says meat, but really it means his meals, and of the wine which he drank. So nourishing them 3 years. At the end thereof, they might stand before the king. The purpose is to be examined. And then we have the names of 4 out of the 3,023. And they were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And we continue to read Daniel 1 and verse 7, upon whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. He gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, to Hananiah of Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. Here's a question for you. Why did he change their names? Assimilating them even by their names now. And so he's really somewhat erasing their Jewish identity and giving them an identity of a Chaldean youth. Then we have the guy that decides to stir the pot, and he decides to stand up, and that is Daniel. And so we read in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now we already know the names of 4 Jewish youth, but only one is named here. Now the other 3 will end up following Daniel. But it's notable that it was one of those young men that made the difference. As a result of his testimony, others followed, as we'll see in our study. And then some thoughts about Daniel being a man of integrity. I just wanted to give it to you. I'm not teaching you anything most of you don't already know, and I'm very much aware of that. And so regarding his integrity, he purposed in his heart a point of conviction to engrave on your heart. It's something that you can't erase. Something that is there regardless of the test or the trial that you might face. So Daniel purposed in his heart he would not defile himself. Verse 9, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So it's very interesting that God was working in a heathen's life to give favor to this Jewish youth. This Jewish youth who said, I will not defile myself with the king's meat. And so the dynamic is very interesting. But the point I would make, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love. So here's the question, and it's obvious. How did he win this prince of the eunuchs' favor? And the answer is, it was a God thing. It was something that God did. God working in his heart. Never underestimate that God is working, and you may not even realize it. You might be facing an enemy. You might be facing an adversary. You might be facing a time of trial, a time of trouble. But the fact that God can be working really helps us understand he is sovereign God, and he does work in the hearts and lives of men. Daniel 1 and verse 10, the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king. Now what was he afraid that the king would do? Off with your head, right? I mean, he is being challenged to defy Nebuchadnezzar's command. Nebuchadnezzar's command is give the kids the meat, give them the wine. By the way, what was Daniel's objection to the meat? I shared with you a few weeks ago, it could have been meat offered to idols. It could have been unclean meat according to the Old Testament law. And so there was a reason for that. The wine would probably have been that which would have been intoxicating. So he wasn't going to lose control of his faculties at all. And so the prince of the eunuchs challenges Daniel, and he says, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat, your drink, for why should he see your faces? Worse lightning, other words, see you sickly or see you weak. Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. And then I wanted to point out some things to you in this, and this is good for life and business. Anytime you approach a leader with a problem, you would be wise to approach with a solution, right? The last thing a leader wants to hear is that we've got a problem. Well, we already know we have a problem. Once you tell me we got a problem, we got a problem. But it would really be nice to have a solution. And so Daniel was very wise in that he proposed an alternative. He said, I will not defile myself with the king's meat, but he was wise enough to propose an alternative. And then I wrote this up here for the notes. Daniel proposed an alternative to the king's diet and entrusted his life to the sovereignty of God. He had already said, I will not defile myself, but he proposed an alternative to the king's diet. And so Daniel challenges the prince of the eunuchs in verse 12, prove or test thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now let me pause there. Nebuchadnezzar said, I will come back and examine you in 3 years. So if I'm the prince of the eunuchs, I'm thinking, okay, 10 days out of 3 years, we can do this, right? We can do this. And so prove thy servants for 10 days. Let them eat basically a vegetable type diet there and water to drink. And then that brings me to just some things I wanted to notice about Daniel. The first was he was submissive in his spirit. In no way do you see him challenging the authority. You see him coming to the authority in a submissive spirit. Another is he was sincere in his appeal. He had a conviction, but he stated his conviction in such a way that it was not to provoke the prince of the eunuchs to anger, but it was to appeal to him. For me, I don't know about you, but these are good things to know in life. When you come in contact with an authority, how do you respond to that authority? Do you appeal to them? And then let our countenances be looked upon. Verse 14, so he, the prince of the eunuchs, consented to them in this matter, and he proved them 10 days. So 10 days would pass, and then we come to he was scriptural in his purpose. His requests grew out of his convictions. His requests grew out of his convictions. And so I'm going to move on. And God then blessed Daniel's request, honored their resolve to live holy lives. And I hope I'm not going too fast, but I might be going too fast, but anyway, I'm going to keep moving. All right, here we go. Physically, then, mentally shrewd. Our diets, do they affect our mental acuity? They certainly do, right? There's some things you can eat and you're ready to go to sleep, right? There's other things you can eat and they stimulate not just your body physically, but they stimulate you mentally. And some of you are wondering, I wonder what the president had for dinner the other night. And I'm just going, the suggestion was Jell-O gelatin. All right, moving on. Thirdly, I'm not going to park there. I'm going to keep moving. At the end of 10 days, their countenance is fair. And so Melzar took away the portion of their meat, the wine that they should drink, and he gave them pulse. And then, here we go, this thought about their whole being. As for these 4 children, the 4 Jewish young men we've mentioned, God gave them knowledge, skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So it's very interesting. Because they were faithful, God blessed them, right? God honored them. And so, again, it wasn't just knowledge, but it was knowledge that God gave them, an insight, an understanding, a skill in learning and wisdom. So immediately, because of their faithfulness, they're at the top of the class. Even though the 3 years would pass before they would stand before Nebuchadnezzar. And then the last one I would suggest is spiritually. Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now, I can't say, and I don't know, that Daniel had that gift before he took his stand in Babylon, and he was faithful. And as a result of that faithfulness, God honored him. I would challenge all of us. As we get older, I think we look at messages like this and say, well, that applies to youth. It really applies to all of us at all ages of our life. That God desires to honor us, to bless us. He wants us to be faithful, and He promises if we're faithful, He will bless us. The problem with Israel was that they broke God's covenant, and they suffered the consequences. And so Daniel and those Jewish young men, they find themselves in Babylon because they had grown up in a culture of wickedness. But it proves to me that even in a wicked culture, there can be young people that are faithful and loyal to the Lord. But I would challenge you, the quality that we find in their life was when Daniel purposed in his heart. I believe there's so many elements of our culture that has desensitized us. Television, the internet, social media, Everywhere you turn, they have phones and they have iPads and they have all this. And one of the things I've been reading is that when children get those electronics young, what I have read is that it starts to change, rewires their brain in such a way that they lack the facility of critical reasoning. Now, there are educators here, so I'm kind of out of my element, but I, I like the fact that here, the school with Tanya over it, we pretty well have moved the computers out, and our kids are back in the books. Um, for a while there was that computer lab and all, and you want to prepare kids, but the fact is, I even find the difference. Like when I'm doing my sermons and all, the first thing I do, I use an ink pen and paper, and that's where I write. I have my Bible open, and I go through and I write. And then I sit down at the computer, and then I start typing in my outline. And then after I do that, I go back with my ink pen again, and I start writing. There's something about the mechanics, for me at least, for my brain, the mechanics of writing that has helped me to grow and to remember, to strengthen my memory. Any of you comments, or I know some of you are teachers by trade. Yeah, Tanya?
I did research on it last year.
Oh, okay.
And electronics do rewire your brain. They make your left brain super active and your right brain is suppressive.
All right, tell the difference for us.
Brain is going to be like your gas pedal, and your right brain is going to be your brake pedal. So the right brain is going to tell you to stop doing things, to have inhibitions, to when I say something.
Inhibitions, things like that.
So your left brain is going to tell you, oh, I can do whatever I want to, touch a hot stove, don't have social graces.
Okay.
I don't say.
So that would be when we use the term a kid doesn't have common sense. Their left brain is not.
Their brake pedal's not telling them to stop.
Right. Well, anybody else?
Well, they've moved phones and everything out of the classroom, even in public schools,
Yeah.
because it's such a distraction.
Yeah. I've heard of some schools that actually have, when you walk in the door, they have somewhere that you put your phone away to go on into the school. So let me ask you on a musical standpoint. Music trains what side of the brain? Would it train the right or the left?
Really both.
Both? So eye-hand coordination, right? The mind working, reading.
They've got scans where while someone is playing an instrument, like their whole brain lights up.
Like red, right? Wow.
So, but yeah, they make it like at our school, their devices are off and out of sight, and because if not, they just sit there and
Yeah.
they still try that, but it's
Well, I know there's been a little bit of a rebellion about, because I got little grandchildren now, a little bit of a rebellion moving away from electronic toys and gadgets to back to what I would almost call old-fashioned toys, because the old-fashioned toys create innovation. They learn to be creative in their playing, versus the electronics removes all creativity, right?
Yeah, well, electronics kind of have the exact same, you're going to come to the exact same end. You need to have toys that basically you can't use up. You can make them different, they can do different things for
Right.
you.
Wow. So you wonder, this is a generation now, right, that they've grown up with electronics and playing computer games hours and hours a day. You wonder what in the world's happening to their minds, you know?
It makes me very encouraged when I see my daughter Sarah. She lives up in Gainesville. She homeschools her 3 older children, and electronics, no way to be found. I mean, of course
They have them, but they don't let them stay with them all day. Yeah.
They enjoy what we enjoyed growing up. They
Yeah.
enjoy reading a book,
Yeah.
writing, even drawing a picture, coloring, just those basic things. And yes, feel like their entire brain functions are being used. It's
Right,
it's
right.
all opened up.
Well, even I can remember as I was growing up, I mean, you would have coloring books, like a stack of coloring books and crayons. And man, if you were really, I mean, you would have one of the big Crayola boxes of crayons, man, you've arrived, And but you think back, that was old-fashioned, but it was creative. So I know I went off the path there, but I just wanted to point that out, though, that God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had a gift that God had particularly given him. Let me move on. Then spiritually gifted, I've already mentioned that. So physically, mentally, and spiritually gifted. And then God moved the king's heart to promote Daniel and his peers. And I won't have time to cover all of this tonight. But as you start going through this, the 3 years passes, and then they are going to be interviewed by Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we know that the first captivity was 3,023 Jews that were taken into captivity. We don't really know how many were in the palace, but Daniel and, of course, his Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were there. Let me keep reading. Now, at the end of the days that the king had said that he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. He communed with them. Among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. So they were particularly blessed and promoted. They were recognized for their skills. And so I'm keep reading, verse 20. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians, astrologers that were in all his realm. Now, I find that pretty incredible, don't you? I mean, 10 times better. So a lot of trust was put into them. And then moving on, Daniel excelled and served the kings of Babylon and Persia. Here's what you read at the end of chapter 1. Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. How about that? Man, he had job security, even though sometimes it came with a little bit of danger, right? Daniel in the lion's den, we'll hit that maybe next Wednesday, we'll see. And then I wanted to hit quickly the irascible king and a sovereign God. And so Nebuchadnezzar dreams, right? Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Let me go through a little bit of this, and you know the background, so I'm just going to walk through it. We will not get to the statue, the idol that he dreams about, but we'll cover this first part here. The perplexity of the king. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep break from him. And it's one of those reminders that when the king can't sleep, nobody's going to sleep, right? And so he was a troubled king. He dreamed dreams. And then the proposition, the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and they stood before the king. I find it very interesting that those 4 Jewish young men were not called. So there was the leaning on the Chaldeans. I don't know who sent for them, but these came out, astrologers, sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. And they stood before the king. And then the protest. Basically, the king says, I dreamed a dream. And they said, well, tell us what you dreamed and we'll tell you the interpretation. No. I dreamed a dream. You tell me what the dream meant. And so you go through this whole drama. O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream and we will show the interpretation. Of course, he didn't remember it. He wanted them to tell the dream. And so they answered again and they said, let the king tell his servants the dream and we will show the interpretation of it. And so as a result of the king saying, tell me the dream and tell me the interpretation, and they said, no, you tell us the dream and we'll tell you the interpretation. And, Nebuchadnezzar's wise enough. He says, I know what you're up to. You're going to make up an interpretation if I tell you the dream. So you walk out the provocation. Daniel 2 and verse 12 and 13. And for this cause the king was angry and very furious, and he commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Tomorrow's devotional is in Esther. and where Haman has Ahasuerus signed the decree to kill all the Jews, right? And so very much here, these pontiffs from ancient times would off with your head with a whim. And so we read in verse 13, and the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. So it's interesting. Daniel and the three peers, they were not invited to the dream, to give the dream or give the interpretation of it. But when it came time to kill them, Daniel is on the kill list. That brings me to Daniel's dilemma. Daniel's dilemma. And here we go. The plea for patience. So they come to Daniel's chamber, and he's on the kill list. So we read, Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And we read in verse 15, and he answered and he said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is this decree, or why is the decree so hasty from the king? Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. And so he would have told him, because the king can't remember the dream, so he told us to tell him the dream. They couldn't tell him the dream, and then we couldn't give him the interpretation, so everybody's going to be killed. Then Daniel went in, and he desired of the king that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation. Now, that took some boldness. In ancient times, if you approach the king uninvited, that act in itself could cost you your life. So again, what do we see? Daniel's faith. Daniel's faith. So Daniel goes into Nebuchadnezzar, and he asks, give us time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. And that brings me to the prominence of prayer. And I wanted to point that out to you tonight. And so here's what Daniel did. Daniel went to his house, and he made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and his companions. So there were others. Verse 18, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So you see the prominence of prayer. What did Daniel do? Daniel went back to his house, and he said, boys, pack your bags. We got to get out of this place, right? No, he went back to his house and he prayed. He prayed. Now, the power of prayer. So we have the plea for patience, prominence of prayer, and the power of prayer. Daniel 2 and verse 19. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Now, I wanted to point out, I'm skipping a lot of things, but a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you about this. And first of all, the power of prayer. Well, here we go. Confess your faults one to another. Pray one for another that ye may be healed. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. I think one of the things that we can look back on our lives is that we should have prayed more. Right? Give you a couple of thoughts about prayer. The first is this lesson, that God's revelation came after prayer. The second is the revelation came after patience. So prayer and patience. I don't know your personality type, but patience probably would be my great weakness, right? Now, I've learned, as I think it was Scott was saying, as you get older, to be more patient. But I thought that was a good thought that we see there. So he sought the Lord. And then I want to close with this tonight for your outline. And it is a sovereign divine. And that is, as you look at verses 19 through 22, we really see the character of the Lord. And so for your outline, I want to give you some thoughts as we close. Daniel 2, verse 19. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So for your outline, our Lord is what? He is the Lord of heaven. When we pray, we're praying to the Lord of heaven. Think about that. And then another is found here. Tell me if you can figure this one out. Daniel answered and he said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." Who is the Lord? He is what? Huh? Well, no, not right here. Forever and ever. He's the Lord of what? Eternity. He's the Lord of eternity. And then thirdly, well, I go a little bit further, and this is what Scott was mentioning. Who is the Lord? He is the Lord of wisdom. For wisdom and might are his. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. And then another that we see. For wisdom and might are his. Who is the Lord? He is the Lord Almighty. He is the Lord Almighty. There is nothing that he cannot do. Nothing that is beyond his strength. A thought that goes with that, I can't remember if this is on your outline or not. Thine, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in heaven and in earth is thine. Thine is the kingdom, O Lord, and thou art exalted as head above all. He is sovereign God. Both riches and honor come of thee, and thou reignest over all. And in thy hand is power and might. And in thy hand it is to make great and to give strength unto all. Wow. Our God's hand is not slack. It's not shortened, is it? Another, he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings, and he setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. The Lord is what? He is sovereign of creation. He changes the times and the nations. So I would put maybe a subpoint. He's the Lord of nature, and he's also the Lord of nations. You know, I hope no believer at Hillsdale is panicking over who the president's going to be. We may not be happy about whatever the outcome is, whatever it is, but we need to always remember God is sovereign. He's sovereign. And then another, he revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. The Lord, he is the Lord of revelations. If any man lack wisdom, let him do what? Ask, seek,